We're here on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, about 2/3 of the way down from the top of the Amud, the third of the wide lines. Ha'arisin v'chachirin v'kablonim harelu yasu achirim b'shvilim. So again, we're talking about avelus, and in certain conditions, under certain situations, we are allowed to perform malacha on behalf of the avel. Arisim are sharecroppers, so they'll get a shlish or revia, they'll get a certain percentage of the produce of the profits. And then we have something called chachirin, and chachirin is charge a fixed rental for the use of the land. And finally, we have kablonim. And the kablonim are, let's say the field produces a certain agreed upon rental, the owner receives it all. And if it doesn't produce even that amount, the tenant is not obligated to supplement it from elsewhere. And then we have the kablonim, are salaried field workers, and they're paid a set salary by the owner to work the field for a certain amount of time. And his income is in no way dependent upon how much the field produces. And in all these cases of arisin and chachirin and kablonim, the avel is allowed to appoint someone to perform all these avodos, these tasks on his behalf, to prevent the owner of the land from suffering a financial loss. For example, in the case of the sharecropper, the oris, his failure to tend to the field will diminish the owner's portion of the crop. In the case of the chachirin, the tenant farmers, the untended field may not produce even the agreed upon rental, in which case the owner will receive nothing. Or in the case of the salaried field worker, the owner will absorb whatever loss there is, since it is he who receives the entire crop. Then we go on to chamorin, gamolin, and saponin. Okay, chamorim are those who rent out donkeys. Gamolin rent out camels, and saponim rent out boats. Harelu lo yasu. Here we're not going to allow them to perform on behalf of the avel during his avelus. In other words, they may not initiate new rentals during that time, because only they will suffer a loss by abstaining from work. No one else will will suffer a loss. And therefore they cannot initiate new rentals. But im hayu mucharim, muscharim, etzacherim, if let's say the mourners or their animals were hired out to others to work for an extended period of time before they became mourners, arei elu yasu, they can perform their tasks during their mourning periods. Otherwise, they'll lose their full pay and cause their employer a significant loss. So let's say, for example, a person or his animal was hired out for an extended period of 1 or 2 months, during which time he unfortunately became an avel. So the Brisa is allowing the mourner and his animal to continue to work through the mourning period. For if you prohibit him from working, he stands to lose not only the wages of the mourning period, but also wages for the entire balance of his contract. And furthermore, his employer stands to suffer a significant loss if he, the avel, cancels during the term of his contract. So therefore, we're going to permit him to continue working throughout his mourning period. Schir Yom, on the other hand, if he's hired for a single day and now he became an avel in the middle of the day, afilu be'ir acheres lo yaseh, even if he has employment in another city, he may not continue to perform his work. So in this case that he gets paid per day, And if in the middle of the day he became an Avel, then he's going to be paid for that half of a day's work. He's not going to suffer any loss of significance. The loss of the other half of the day's wages is considered insignificant. And it's unlike the previous case of one who was hired for an extended period of time. And therefore, in this case, he's a day worker. We're not going to allow him to continue his work when he's an oven. Haisa meleches acherim biyado. Let's say when he became an ovel, he had already contracted to perform the work of others. Afal pi shekiboles lo yaseh. Even if the contract was on a piecework basis, not related to time at all, that's kablanus. You pay for the final product. Let's say, for example, he was paid for weaving a garment with an agreed upon fee, and he has no obligation to complete this garment by a certain date. So lo yasa will wait till after he finishes Avelus, and then he'll complete the garment. The Gemara says the following: Afal pi shebekiboles. It doesn't make sense when the Brisa says Afal pi lo mi boy she'ena kiboles. Are you telling me that it's not even necessary to speak of a case where it's not a piecework contract? Because in that case, the mourner may certainly not do the work. Adarabah. On the contrary, kiboles bidkididei domi. It's like his own work. It's more likely to be prohibited than work performed under a time constraint. Elaima therefore rewrite the brisa bein kiboles, bein she'ena kiboles, whether it was contracted that he would be paid for the final product, or it wasn't contracted in that way. Lo yasa, he's not permitted to perform the work. So even if one is not entirely free of time constraints, he still possesses some leeway to postpone the work until after the mourning period, and therefore we're not going to permit him to do the work during his avelus. Let's say they had already contracted to perform the work for him before he became an ovel. Is bebeis lo yasu, he shouldn't perform the work in the house of the ovel, but bebeis acher yasu, he's allowed to perform the work on behalf of the ovel in a different house, in a different location. If he works at home, then people might suspect him of assisting, meaning the ovel assisting in the work himself. If, on the other hand, he works elsewhere, then it's apparent to the observer that this object belongs to the mourner. It's not apparent, to the observer that this object belongs to the mourner. Miriam Breder Ravin Umar Breder of Acha Breder Rava Havalu Ahu Gamla. So this Marion and Mar had a yoke of oxen, Bahadi Adadi. Each one owned one particular animal. Isra'a Bey Milsa. Something unfortunately took place. B'mar Bereder of Acha Bereder Rava. It means he lost a close relative, and now he's in Avelus of Paske Legamli. He took his ox out of the yoke, so he would not benefit from the work of the animal. Midrabanan, an Avel is not allowed to his animal to perform work during the Avelus. Glorious Omer of Ashi, Gavra Rabba Kimar Bereder of Acha Ovid Hachi. Someone as great as Mar would do this. Okay, he's not concerned for his own loss, but why isn't he concerned about the loss of others, like Marion, who is the partner in this yoke of oxen? But Tanya, we learned in a brisa, And this is the Bryce that we quoted earlier. Im hayu muskarim o mucharin eitz acherim halvei elu yasin. If they or their animals were hired out to others, they may perform their tasks during the mourning period in part to prevent a loss to their employers. So that we see to that to save the employers from a hefsed, we're going to allow work to be done. And all this is true in the case of a pre-existing contract. So why did Mar not permit his animal to work so that Marion would not suffer a loss? So Mar answers, for who savar adam chashuv shayni. Mar thought that a prominent person is different, has to be more strict, and therefore he was machmir on himself, and he could not permit his animal to continue working. Had Mar permitted his ox to work Marion's field, a casual observer might have assumed that Mar entered into the agreement with Marion during his period, meaning after he was in mourning. And as a prominent person, Mar was obliged to distance himself from even a mere appearance of impropriety. The Yisem Nikir. And this leads us to the top of Daf Yud Beis, Amud Aleph, Omar Shmuel, which in Mirz Hashem, we'll pick it up tomorrow.